This is episode 2 of the Worship Bassist Boot Camp, and this episode is going to focus on basic technique. Now I know you're going to want to just jump ahead and just go, oh, technique, I don't want to deal with that. I just want to learn how to play notes. I want to learn how to play parts and start having fun playing music. Yeah, I understand that, but this is extremely important. Technique is one of the most important things you can really focus on early in your playing, because if you start using bad technique or you're not focusing on proper technique when you start playing, those bad techniques are going to start getting baked into your playing, and then you're going to have to spend years unlearning those techniques and unraveling them and getting rid of them and bringing in good techniques, and that's a real pain. So you want to start off early with good technique, because then you're baking in that good technique, and then that's going to help out with your playing. What are some of the downsides of not focusing on technique to begin with? Well, if you got bad technique, that's going to start showing up over time as you're trying to get better on the instrument. You'll see that you'll start to plateau on your instrument because your technique's holding you back and you can't seem to get to that next stage that you're trying to get to in your playing. Also, over time, if you're using bad technique, you're going to start seeing aches and pains in your body. Now, if you're young, it might take a while for that to start showing up, but trust me, over time, bad technique will start showing up in your body. You'll start feeling aches and pains. When you're playing bass, it can be everything from your fingers, your hands, your arms, your shoulder, your back. It can really impact a lot of areas of your body. So you don't want to have tendonitis, you don't want to have carpal tunnel syndrome, you don't want to have joint pain, you don't want any of those things. So definitely focus on doing proper technique early. Now I want to say that I am not a trained instructor. I'm a dude on the internet with a YouTube channel that I've set up, but I am classically trained on piano. I am self-taught on bass. However, the techniques that I've learned myself over time are things that are pretty much common knowledge, things that most people agree on. If you're to go to a bass instructor, these should be in line with what a bass instructor is going to tell you, but it's definitely not a substitute for some real instruction. So definitely supplement this video with some proper paid instruction from a professional teacher. But also, as you're going along in this video series, definitely refer back to this video because it's easy to forget a lot of this stuff when you're starting out. So really study this particular video, then as you go forward in the video series, come back to it and re-practice some of these techniques and make that part of your regular regimen of what you're doing with your playing. So on that note, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's start with the first thing is we've got a bass and we've got a strap. Where do we put this strap? Now, a lot of times you'll see people with a bass on a strap really low like this, and I guess the idea is to look cool. A lot of times they'll have the bass out like this, and they'll be playing like this, and it's usually a young person, because as you get older, you'll realize that, you won't be playing long that way until you'll really start getting some pains. Why is that? Well, because number one, your left hand right here is going to be in a really bad, awkward position. And so you're going to end up having a lot of issues with your left hand. So the idea is to get the instrument up to a more ideal playing position. And of course, that's going to vary from person to person. However, at least getting it up higher and positioning the bass more at a 45-degree angle like this will be better, because then this left hand is you want to get your left hand so that it's more straight. You don't want to have a weird angle with your left hand like this. You don't want that. You kind of want more of a straight. And the kind of way I think of it is, if you ever seen an upright bass player, they're kind of like this and they're like this. And so they're playing their instrument like this. So the more you can kind of get your bass up like an upright bass player, the better. Now, One thing to keep in mind though with that approach is there is something that can happen, especially like I'm playing with this bass right here, and in order to get that up like that, there's a tendency to want to then use my thumb to push up on the neck of the instrument. And that is not a good thing that you want to do either. You never want to have your thumb pushing up to hold up the neck of the bass. There's something called neck dive, which a lot of basses will have, and the bass will want to slide down this way, especially when there's a lot of weight on the headstock of the bass. And some basses are better and some are worse at neck dive. And so if you're having to fight a bass with neck dive and push up on the bass with your thumb, that's just going to, over time, it's going to limit your ability to play smoothly on the bass because you're spending more time holding up the instrument with your thumb. And also it's going to not be a good position for you in order to avoid injury over time either. Now this bass and this strap, this really isn't the strap that I use with this bass. So let me put this down. Now I'm not saying that you're going to need to have an ergonomic bass like this, but in this particular case, this is already set up with the strap that I use, and this is the bass that I use the most. And as you can see, I'm not even holding the bass at all, and I can just make it sit at this 45-degree angle. I mean, it's not moving. And so for me, that's why I really like this bass, because it's very comfortable to play. I can play this bass for a longer period of time than I can play any of my other basses, where it's kind of, the bass wants the neck of the bass wants to drop down more like this, so there's more of a tendency to want to push up with the thumb in order to hold it up. And so that's why this bass I can play for a longer period of time before I feel anything in my hands, where if I play my other basses that are a little bit more neck divey, then usually my left arm is going to start getting sore sooner, and so that's not a good thing. Anytime you're feeling any kind of pain or aches in your body, that's your excuse me, that's your body telling you that you're doing something wrong. All right, so since we're talking about the neck of the instrument, and we know that we don't want to hold the instrument up with our thumb, so where also do we put our thumb? Now you'll see a lot of bass players, well, let me rephrase that. You'll see some bass players that are self-taught that'll like almost grip the instrument like this, and sometimes even play the top string up here with their thumb or something weird like that. You don't want to play like that either, because that's bad technique, and also it doesn't give you the ability to really move your other fingers around. I'm not even sure how people play like that. But you definitely don't want to do that. And you don't want to be holding the bass up with your thumb either. So ideally you want to have the bass neck and your thumb pretty much right, just resting behind it. And then your fingers are going to wrap around like this, but you're just kind of resting it against it. And you're not really, I'm not squeezing it with my hand. It's just barely on there, just as a counterpoint to my fingers, what they're playing. That's it. Very easy. And then when playing the bass, now a lot of times, and we'll get into this in some of the later video series, but most early bass players usually stay up in this top area of the bass. They get a little bit more afraid to start drifting away from these notes up here, because it's easy to learn these notes and just kind of stay in this area, and that's fine. But one thing I see a lot of new bass players doing, and even some that have been playing for a while that haven't developed technique, is they will play, they'll never use their pinky, they'll always play with these three fingers. And that's an issue, because if you notice when you're higher up on the instrument here, and this is also a shorter scale bass, so if I was on a regular full-size bass, you'd see it even more. And if you just play like this, then you can be straining your hands a little bit more, where if you play with your pinky, it's actually a little bit easier. And your pinky is actually, for me, my pinky is actually, I use my pinky as much as I use any of my other fingers on my left hand. And it's very important to make sure you start utilizing your pinky early on, because it's easy to just go, oh, well, when I get more strength, I'll add it in later. No, add it in like right away. Make sure you're always utilizing your pinky in your playing, pinky playing. And because you know, you'll start learning as you start doing your positions, having that pinky in the mix really helps out a lot. So don't be afraid of using your pinky early on, and don't feel like you have to use one finger per fret. You know, if you want, just, you know, you can use your pinky even though you might think, oh, well, I've got 2 frets here, so I should be playing with my ring finger here. Well, you can play with your pinky if you want, especially on this part of the neck where the frets are further apart. So the pinky is actually a very good tool to use. All right, so where on the instrument should you actually fret a note? Now, each fret, like say for example, if I was to play a G note on the E string, I can move my finger up and down within this whole area within the fret, and it still makes the G note, because the note's getting cut off here regardless of where I play it on the fretboard. However, that being said, you don't want to get sloppy and just play anywhere on this fretboard. You want to have it closer to where the actual fret is. So if you're cutting off the note right here for a G, let's play that right on the fret or as close to it as possible instead of playing it here. Because if I'm playing it, the further I play it down here, it gets harder to push it down and get a clean note. You can kind of hear that. But the closer I get to the fret here, the cleaner the note's going to sound. So make sure that you're playing as close to the fret as possible. Okay, so here's a quick strength building exercise for your left hand. Utilizing 1 fret per finger, even though, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to do 1 fret per finger when you're actually playing, but in this case, we're just building some finger strength. So on your E string, which is, if you're on a 4-string bass, it's the top string up here. If you're on a 5-string bass like I am, then it's going to be the 2nd string down. So just practice that. And that's a good strength building exercise. When you got that 1st string down, now move up to the next string higher. And when I say higher, I actually mean lower down. The pitch is higher, but it's actually going that direction on the bass. When you get that string feeling comfortable, go to the next one. And then, obviously, then to the next one. Then put them all together. And then you can, once you get comfortable doing all 4 strings, then when you get to the top here, then you can just reverse direction. And do that for as long as you can until your hand starts to get tired. If it says, hey, I'm getting sore, then definitely stop, because you always want to only play for as long as your hand's capable of tolerating it. So don't overdo it and stress yourself out, because you'll know when you first start, that particular exercise will definitely, you'll feel it pretty quick. So build up that strength over time. The first time you do it, you might only spend a minute or 2 on it. The next day you might do 3 or 4 minutes. Then the next day after that, you might do 5 minutes, etc., etc. All right, so now let's look at the right hand. And the right hand, now, first of all, I want to mention, if you see bass players playing like this and they've got their hand kind of bent at an angle like this, that's also bad technique because it's stressing out your tendons at this break point right here. You want to have your right hand as your left hand to be as straight as possible, and then your fingers are just going to be able to play. So ideally, in this case, instead of playing more like this, I try to always remember, keep my hand up, because I'm guilty sometimes of doing this right here. And that's definitely not a good thing. So that's been a bad habit I've been having to break over the years. And I always tend to fall into this. So that's why I'm saying start early on your technique. So keep your hand a little bit, your arms straighter, and then you're going to play the bass. Typically, if you're playing fingerstyle, you're mostly going to be playing with these two fingers right here. Now, some people play with 3 fingers. I'm not that person. I play with 2, but there are some people that play with 3, like that. And there might even be some out there that play with 4, but I don't really know of any, to be honest. However, most people play with 2. You don't want to play just with 1 because that can limit your, how many notes you can play, especially if you're like trying to play 16th notes. Now you can I kind of can do this kind of where I scrape back and forth, but it's still easier. Over time, it's going to be easier to get, if you get both of those fingers working together, it's just the way to do it. And it's the way most people do it, and it gives you the ability to play a little bit faster without burning out just one finger over time. You don't want to have repetitive stress of just one finger doing that. And so basically you're just alternating between 2 fingers. So you're just, there's not necessarily a right or wrong way. It's just doing it where you're alternating between those 2 fingers. And I just said there's not a right or wrong way, but technically there's some ways that you want to do it. Like, for example, if I can play the scale and look at the camera at the same time, there might be some different viewpoints on how to actually go up and change strings. In my case, you could do it that way, where you're alternating every finger, or you could do it where you're starting on your pointer finger every time you change a string. But the main thing is just to get comfortable with, to start out with just alternating those 2 fingers as much as possible, so it feels natural and you're not just wanting to stick with just 1 finger. Okay, so then the other thing is what to do with your thumb. And there's a couple different approaches. The most common that are out there of different techniques that people do is either they'll put their thumb, they'll keep it on the top of a pickup like this, or some other type of thumb rest, and then they will, when they're moving up and down the strings, they're moving like this. Now, as you can tell, that sounded pretty sloppy because that's not the technique that I use. That's a very uncomfortable technique for me. So the technique I'm using is I'm actually moving my thumb as I'm going up and down the different strings. As you can see, my thumb moves, and there's a reason for that too, is because I can always feel where I'm at on the bass, and also I can use the thumb to mute the string that's above the string that I'm playing. So in this case, if I'm playing this string right here, the A string, the E string is being muted, so it doesn't ring out. So if I'm playing a part and then on the E string, and now I go to the A string, I don't have both of them ringing out at the same time. It mutes this E string, and then it serves that purpose of acting as a mute. And so as I'm moving up the bass, and as you notice, there's then an issue with, if I'm coming back down, all of those notes are ringing out too. And so we might as well mention muting while we're on the topic of it with the right hand. In this case, you would then mute with your left hand. Muting is very, very important on the bass. So in this case, if I'm doing an open string, and I'm going to the next open string down, you see how my left hand's moving? It's muting. It's muting not by pushing down and playing a note, just by touching, lightly touching the string to mute it. And that's a very important technique. Now, if I'm playing, say if I'm coming down the string like that, then I'm automatically muting in a different way. It's hard to actually talk about it and actually make it work right, but so when I'm playing this note with my pinky, it's actually this part is playing in this case, the D string, but on the G string, it's just resting on it to mute it out. Same thing with this case. I'm playing this string with my finger, but the other two fingers are just resting on the strings underneath it in order to mute those out. So muting, it can be when you're first starting, muting can actually be quite a challenge, and it can be difficult to really get comfortable with it. That's why it's important to practice muting techniques early. But once you get muting down, it'll really solve a lot of problems that you have with playing. Because a lot of bassists, when they're first starting out, their bass parts don't sound really good because they got too many notes all ringing out, and it just sounds really messy. All right, so and then another technique with your right hand, and this is something that I kind of developed on my own. It turns out that there is some other people out there that do use this technique, but I don't think it's as common, but it works for me really well. Okay, so I've got my thumb on whatever string above whatever string that I'm playing, but I also take my ring finger on my right hand and I actually just rest it. In this case, again, I'm using a 5-string bass, so it's just resting on this B string in an upward position. So almost like I'm lifting the bass up with my ring finger. And then, so when I put my thumb here, it actually creates a really secure hold for me. And I'm not grabbing it really hard like this, I'm just showing you. So it's actually, this finger's actually resting gently there, this thumb's resting gently here, and then I'm playing, and then I'm moving, I'm actually kind of pivoting on this finger. So I move my fingers out of the way. You can see the ring finger still on that B string. And I'm not doing any muting, just so I can show you what I'm doing with my right hand. So that's another technique. I don't know if I advise you to learn that technique. It works really well for me. Some people might say that that's not a good technique to use, but I do know that there are some other players that utilize it. Okay, so I hope that this basic techniques video was helpful for you and you've picked up some things, you've learned some things that you can start applying as you're learning to play the instrument. And like I said, it's basic techniques, so it's not going to cover everything that's out there. And of course, as I mentioned earlier in the video, you might want to consult with a professional instructor, get some professional instruction from a teacher that you're actually paying, because there's a lot of value. Trust me, there's a lot of value in actually paying a professional instructor to work with you on your technique as well as your playing, and there's a lot of knowledge there that they can provide. But this basic techniques, I hope that it's helpful for you. It's giving you some good starter points to work with, and also hope that you'll come back to this video after you've watched some of the other videos in this series so that you can refresh on your technique and make sure you're constantly focusing on that as you learn to play the instrument. So if you like the video, definitely hit the thumbs up button on YouTube there and like it. Also subscribe, and yeah, God bless you. Thanks for watching.